Ralph, thank you. It always gets a lot of excitement. This year, there's naturally a bunch of teeth gnashing. Just even though you don't do anything other than execute the poll and write it, what have you heard the most about since it came out yesterday at noon?
You know, the funny thing is, Paul, I think because the college football ecosystem has been ranking these teams since January 11th, right? Don't the way too early's come out right after the national championship game. I feel like I don't get as many complaints as I used to, because I even think fans, by the time we get to this point, have some idea that a pecking order has been established. That's not necessarily the best thing for the poll. You want people to think outside the box and to be sort of free thinkers and have their own opinions. But I do think you get a little bit of a groupthink, and after all the way too earlys and computer rankings, you end up coalescing around something of a fairly well-established pecking order. What you tend to hear, though, is the schools that have traditionally underachieved lately but are still big brands, right? Miami is 19. Well, what the heck has Miami done over the last few years to prove to be worthy of being ranked? Shouldn't you hold out on them? Toward the back end of the poll, Texas A&M has had a lot of disappointing years over the last few, so why are they ranked? USC is another one that I think there's a fair amount of skepticism. So not so much at the top of the poll, but the back of the poll, you definitely get big brands, some fatigue with big brands getting the benefit of the doubt.
Well, Ralph, I've participated in some of these aimless conversations already since yesterday, and what I've heard how does Florida State, Penn State, and Michigan, there's a lot of chatter about those three. Alabama at 5, Clemson. Those are just some of the starting points. So let me start with you at Alabama. Number 5, I realize it's the lowest since 2009. Does it sound about right to you?
Yeah, it's Alabama problems, right? Oh, my God, we're only number 5. It's been more than a decade since we've been that low. It's, of course, a record that they've been in the top 5 preseason that long. I do wonder if we made a little bit of an overcorrection on Alabama, Paul, and hear me out here. I think there was a little panic when DeBoer takes over late in the off season. You're losing Saban. There's a bunch of guys in the transfer portal. Oh my gosh, what's going on with Alabama? The dynasty's dead, right? And then I think he stabilizes things. You get a kid coming back through the portal in Caden Proctor, which is a good sign. You do well on the recruiting trail, which has nothing to do with this team. But I think you end up getting a situation where people are like, oh, yeah, Alabama, they'll be fine. DeBoer's a good coach. Alabama will be fine. So I do wonder if we're stuck in the middle a little bit, like where we were panicking too much and maybe now we've overcorrected a little bit to pencil Alabama in as number 5. I don't necessarily think it's I don't think it's egregious that they're number 5, but I do think you have a little bit of Alabama still getting that Alabama bump.
A couple other ones. Oregon. I get Oregon. We had Lanning on the other day, and certainly with the quarterback that he has. But how did they suddenly end up that high?
Yeah, I'm with you a little bit on this. Like Oregon, I think there are tiers, right? I think Georgia and Ohio State are a tier. I look at those two teams and think even in a worst case scenario, those two teams are probably going to make the playoff and have a chance to win a national championship, even if things really go off the rails for them. And then, who's the next tier? And I can understand Oregon being in that tier. They did well in the portal, and they've recruited well lately. But they haven't really won a lot of the big games, right? They lost both, 2 of their big games last year. I think there might still be some questions about a defense that did a lot of plugging with the portal. So Paul, if your question is Oregon overrated? Are we buying too much in on Oregon? I would say, yeah, maybe. I can understand, Oregon is probably not as close to the Georgia, Ohio State tier as they are away from it.
Talking to Ralph Russo, there are a couple other ones that there's a tug of war about. Michigan seems to be an enigma. Sharon Moore gets credit because he was there last year when Harbaugh was at home. The schedule brutal, the loss of great players significant. Where are you on the Wolverines?
Yeah, I would target them as my a little overrated. Like if that's the one team I found myself looking at the poll and thinking if I had a vote, I might have nudged them to more of like 11 or 12. But again, I do understand, like, you're the defending national champion. You've got 3 or 4 potential All-Americans on your defense. Like, that's a good sign. I just think that between the brain drain, and I know some people may take issue with that, referring to losing Harbaugh as brain drain, but he is a really good coach. He's a really good football coach. You lose your defensive coordinator, you lose other people on that staff. So you have all that staff turnover, you have all the player turnover, you have all the culture turnover, right? I mean, I think they tried to keep a lot of that in place by hiring more, but with so many new players. And not to mention, first and foremost, a new quarterback who we're not really sure who it's going to be. And if it's the guy who has the most talent, at least we assume it has the most talent, Al Georgie, he's thrown 1 college pass. So I understand the defending national champion is always going to get a certain amount of respect. And I don't know if there's a massive difference between being number 9 and number 12, but I would have probably sided more on outside the top 10 than in the back of the top 10.
Give me something. Try to shake